Kip, it's wonderful to have you on the show today. And you are an expert in something that we really haven't touched on much here on the show. We definitely have spoken a lot about limiting beliefs, maybe how past traumas, past relationships have impacted who we are in the present today and what to do about it. But we haven't dove into the topic of masculinity specifically. And I think you have such an interesting background, both as a former college basketball coach, and now you're doing work with men in particular, teams of men in whatever arena of play that they
Yeah.
play in, whether it's on a field or on a court, to support them in creating healthier team dynamics, healthier takes on masculinity, I should say. I want to just ask, how did you get into doing this type of work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you for having me, Stu. I appreciate being a part of your space. And as we were talking offline, I really appreciate being a part of the breadth and the width of guests you had on. And it's nice to
Mm-hmm.
to find my niche in here and hopefully help your audience. You know, the story, how I got into this and how I'm here now at 45 years old compared to even 5 years ago, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of like where I thought I'd be and how you and I could even cross paths. It's almost like a combination of an awakening and a haunting. And I
Okay.
say that because I know, I've told the story often how my brother's also in coaching and he's a defensive coordinator at University of Nevada. And both of us, we grew up in the same house and our parents were the role models. My dad is a Hall of Fame coach, high school, longtime 40-year plus educator, coached high school, every single sport imaginable, coached college basketball. And my mom is a Montessori school teacher. So I have this origin and this background of, hey, education, transformational relationships, like all these things that went into who I was as a young person growing up. But then, like, almost because I love sports so much and because I think I lost myself in the things I try to go against, I try to champion against now. I lost myself in the man box. I lost myself in unhealthy versions of manhood, chasing stats, chasing achievement, chasing status via conquest, whether that be as an all conference player or this coach that's going to win X amount of games because I got a head job in the college industry at a young age, all these things. And then reality hit me in the face with things that were happening in my area, in my nexus when I was a young head coach, and really had me staring in the mirror like, is this who you're supposed to be? Is this who you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it is, I just don't, it's not what you were, your original path. If you went back to your 12-year-old self or you went back to your 17-year-old self, I don't think that's who they thought we were going to be. And we're going down the wrong area. And so, I mean, that's really a meshing, and we can get into the details of the things that were happening, but it really had me literally staring in a mirror saying, I can't sleep. I know why I can't sleep. I got to do something different. I got to change how I'm coaching. I'm not putting the game away. I'm not putting away my love for basketball, my love for
Sure.
being around my players. I'm not putting away my desire to be competitive, but the tools I'm doing and the things I'm willing to ignore, I'm no longer willing to ignore those things. I'm no longer willing to operate as if they don't exist, because they
Yeah.
do. And they're right here in front of me. And I've got to change what I do if I want to change who I am and hopefully who my guys are. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'd sat in too many living rooms across the country. Like, when I was at D3, we recruited 12 states, right? Like we had to go throw a wide net, and I had a true melting pot of states. I had one roster, I had 9 states in one season on my roster. And I had told people all across the country, if you play for me, that will be your son's elevator to a better person. That will be your son's elevator to a successful life. But I knew I was deploying none of that. I was selling a bill of goods, and then I was
Mm-hmm.
putting them through the usual coaching mechanism of film, practice, weights, rinse, repeat, get to game day, use the scoreboard to judge. And I had to break out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh man, so important. And I mean, here's the thing, like, people think of sports, they think wins and losses. Like, we're recording this right now. I know the World Series between the Dodgers and the
Yep.
Yankees are
Yep.
getting
I'm a
ready to
Dodger guy.
kick up.
Yep.
Yeah, as someone on the West Coast should be probably. But
Right.
but people think of it as wins and losses. It's very much the energy of go, 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 compete,
Yeah.
compete, win, win. Like,
Yeah.
the other stuff doesn't really matter. But what was the stuff that you felt like you were pushing away that was part of your awakening?
Yeah. I was pushing away the ways in which the things that I was willing to frame, educate, and contextualize for my guys. So I was willing to do all the things that could help them see themselves as basketball players in college, see their faults, embrace work ethic, embrace a process to change and grow. I was willing to do that. I was unwilling to wade into. I was almost protecting myself through willful ignorance of choices that were available to them as young men on a college campus. I was unwilling to wade into those waters and create space in my time. Because, as a college basketball coach, even at the level I was at, we control their we control their lives. They pick classes based on our schedules. They operate to our schedules. College basketball is October to March. I mean, it's a really long season. And I mean, their day is scripted to my calendar, and I wasn't putting things on that calendar that would help them look in the mirror as young men, that would help them look in the mirror in their relationships, that would help them look in the mirror in their relationships, not just intimate partners, but with each other and how they were treating each other. I mean, all the things I was unwilling to meet them in and create space for discussion in, I was really struggling with. And it was all the impetus of gender violence incidents taking place on the campus where I was the coach at. And some of the incidents, the perpetrators were male athletes and people. I had been on this campus for 20 some years. I was lucky enough, really unique in the coaching industry. I played there. I was an assistant there. And then I got the head job there. I didn't have to go anywhere. Like, that just doesn't happen in coaching, but that was my story. So alumni, boosters, parents of players, my own family was saying, Kip, what is going on with these things that are happening in like this 6-month span on campus? Why are all these things in the news? What is happening? We have questions. And all I could ever say, Stu, was, well, my guys didn't do it, which was like factually accurate. But I respected the coaches whose players had committed harm. And I knew they were good coaches. I knew they were the type of men they were. And I would have vouched for their character. So I was like, how can I hold myself above this when I know those are good people? Like, we're all missing the boat here. I'm part of this. Right. And so that was the impetus for me to walk across campus at the time. Carly Roner is her name. And she at the time was the Gender Resources and Advocacy Center director at Willamette. She's now the college coordinator for the Oregon Attorney General Sexual Assault Task Force. And I was lucky enough to say, Carly, I do not want my young men that play basketball for me to commit these harms. I don't want them to commit these, but I don't know what else to do besides say, don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Right. And if that worked, then they never turn the ball over. Right. Because I tell them, don't turn it over. And it still happens. I tell them, don't miss shots. And they still miss shots. So I knew there was a fallacy in just saying no, and I'll make a rule. Well, society has rules and it still happens. So I really credit her with opening my eyes to various places I could go educate myself and things I could start doing that eventually, now 13 years later, have led into this curriculum and this framework and this vision I have that I think other coaches can use to do the same thing I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely want to touch base on what some of that curriculum looks like here in a second. Want to go back to this though, because I think it's really important. I feel like in a social media world that we live in, where it's all about glitz and glamour, and just to call it what it is, setting expectations of what it means to be a man in society. I actually think of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as our current North Star of unattainable masculinity in our country.
Right.
But where do you feel like the messaging starts with young men that kind of leads them off the track? Is it social media? Like, where does it come from?
Honestly, I think it's modeling. And I say this, and I appreciate the framing of your question, because I say this knowing the love and reverence I have for my own father. And my answer is that you see it modeled by whoever their first, I'm going to say hero, but it could be their first mentor, their first guide, their first adult presence rooted in masculinity. And I love my dad. I would love to grow up to have the impact on people my dad did. But I also know my dad grew up in American Samoa, a heavily patriarchal society, right? I know my dad was rooted throughout college in his success as an All-American basketball player all the way through coaching. There were some things now that I look back in hindsight that I know I was taught just by watching him. I was taught by listening to and being around the things he chose in his way. So I think that's where it starts. And that's not, and I would characterize my dad as a loving father. So I don't want to paint this as like, hey, all of our heroes growing up have a malicious intent to trap us in the man box. I don't think that at all. But I do think we all, without knowing it, live to the man box. And that's a term coined by Tony Porter and a Call to Man, a fantastic organization. that everyone should check out. And it really speaks to these walls that we're ingrained to. Like, please remove all your emotions. Don't have any emotional fluency. Be stoic, be a robot at all times. Please conquer and destroy anything in your path. Most importantly, any other man in your vicinity, you have to be the best, whether that's
Mhm.
points per game, touchdowns per game, grade
Yes.
point average,
Yes.
salary, career, right?
Yes.
And the feminine, anything feminine, women, girls, anything associated with that is inherently only for you to have sex with and then avoid. You cannot
Yep.
be soft. You cannot be pardon my language. You can't be any of those things or you are not a man, right? And that those walls box you into really this horrific loneliness that
Mhm.
it's precarious, really. I wish I could remember the doctor that said, hey, it's a precarious manhood. Because once I proved to Stu today that I'm a man, because here's what happened on this date, tomorrow I got to prove it again. And I probably got to go farther or Stu's going to make fun of me, right? And so all those things, I think we learn. And yes, I do think I think the young people now, social media can throw it in their face quicker. But I think we were learning it, like, not osmosis is the wrong word, but there's a lot of power in watching and observing and
Yeah.
seeing. Like, I'm thinking of teams, like I'm a freshman on a varsity team and I'm watching the 18-year-old who, I don't know about you, but like he seems like a grown ass man to me when I'm a
Yeah.
15-year-old freshman.
Yeah, of
And I'm
course.
watching him navigate our team room. I'm watching him interact. And I'm, first of all, just trying to stay the hell out of his way because I don't want to catch the ire, but I'm also learning lessons of how to dominate this space. So I think that's where a lot of it starts. And, it's, I think for me and my cause is how can I turn those same mediums, the social media, those platforms into different messaging? I don't know if I can ever, I can't obviously turn back the iPhone,
Sure.
but okay, can I speak to the algorithm and can I be in platform voices that'll combat some of this?
Yeah. Oh, so good and so important. And folks, I know today's conversation is obviously very heavy on masculinity, but for the ladies listening to this, I
Yeah.
want you to listen in too, because this is a way I think for us to just have a conversation that might tell you a little bit more about the men in your lives. And so that's exactly why I wanted to have Kip on the show so that we could start diving into some of this, just to reflect on some of those things you just shared. I grew up very into basketball. I played varsity for 2 years in high school. I was co-captain my senior year. I was not good enough to play at college, but that was the goal. I was obviously
Mm-hmm.
very, very crushed that I didn't. But
Yeah.
what I wanted to reflect on that you shared is I became very clear at a very young age. I'm talking around 6 or 7 that I was not going to meet the standard of what it meant to be like a man amongst the other
Mm,
boys in my age group. And so
yeah.
the way I internalized my value as a man was to be the smartest, to be the most academically successful, to be excellent in other ways, and to your point, to achieve and achieve and achieve in the
Mm-hmm.
areas that I could.
Yeah.
And I'm blessed that I was really good at school, but if I got a B plus in algebra, like I was despondent for weeks
Mm-hmm.
and weeks
Mm-hmm.
because my personal masculinity was challenged because
Yeah.
that was what I was hanging on to. And I knew I wasn't going to go, kick somebody's butt in the schoolyard at whatever
Yeah.
sport. And so this is an issue I think that can take a lot of different permutations. How do we actually begin undoing some of this as
Yeah.
men or for the men in our lives?
Yeah, no, great question. And I when you were talking about your B plus, I remember the sheer horror if I had an 88 and like
Oh,
thinking to
dude.
my right
Yeah.
and thinking to myself, what's it like? I wonder what it would be like for like my buddy, my best friend who got an 86 and he's cool with it. Like
Yeah.
what would the lack of weight of carrying, right? But I'm with you on that. I really tried to focus, and I don't know if this is the right path, and I'm sure there's experts out there that might argue in a different launch point, but I've really tried to launch from emotional literacy and emotional
Yeah.
fluency because
Tell
I
us
think
more.
if we can name, right, and give ourselves and our circles the words to things we feel, experience, and just like how you just self-reflected. Imagine the power of that when if you would have been 16 to have that self-conversation. So I've tried to launch
Yeah.
there, right, with middle school football teams. Like there was a day I had last year. I was fortunate enough to be at Oregon State with the men's basketball team, giving a presentation on teams of men. But later in the day, I had a middle school team back here in Salem. And the Oregon State program was awesome. And I have nothing negative to say about that experience. It was great. But I really felt impacted by the 12 and 13-year-olds at the middle school football team when we were just doing emotional formulas. Like, do you guys know how would you define what is bitterness? Right? What is, because
Mhm.
it's so often I think we give young men permission to feel the extremes. Furious, so please throw your helmet. That he cares, he wants it so much, or
Right.
pure euphoria, but we know nothing in between. Right? We can't
Correct.
speak to any of the middle where most of life takes place, and where hopefully we can navigate most of our time. So I think that's been where I've gone, and maybe that could also be those, Stu. I wonder, because I've also had to. Sometimes I worry I'm sanitizing the message. In the climate we live in, there's certain states where I've had to change the wording of sessions because certain states don't want their young men to feel attacked. They don't want their young men to be stereotyped. But really, like I know 9 out of 10 men won't commit the violent harms I'm hoping to get out of our system. But 9 out of the 10 harms, when they are committed, are done by men. So it's like this
Yeah.
really tough balancing act between, hey guys, this is a reality. Like what I see is us using our platform as athletes, because you and I both know basketball, football players in this country, right or wrong, you can have a whole podcast on that, get a platform, and young boys
Yeah.
watch them and listen to them regardless. So my thing's always been, we can send our young people up there to either continue perpetration of harmful ideology, or we can send them up there as change agents. And I just choose to be the guy trying to help them be change agents. But what I'm trying to change is these violent acts and these horrific things that are done. I just happen to know that just saying don't isn't the answer. We have to completely go to the source, which is this man box and this framing. So I know that's a long-winded way. I
Yeah.
started emotional fluency. Sometimes I'm called in, unfortunately. I get a lot of my referrals when there's already been violent acts and harm caused on a campus, right? And
Yeah.
then then I have to really dive into those actual hard topics that, if your audience is listening, trigger warning, gender violence, rape, sexual
Hmm.
assault,
Hmm.
all those horrible things. But I would love it, right, if the curriculum was mandatory in middle school. It maybe in five
Yeah.
years it's mandatory in sixth grade, fifth grade, because they're already learning these lessons then.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate everything you're saying. And, I think we see every day on the news exactly like where this can go when it's unchecked. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
gun violence in our country is unfortunately
yeah,
perpetrated well into the 90 percentile by
right,
men dealing with a lot of these issues and not feeling like they are okay. And
right.
I've done a lot of emotional intelligence work for myself in order to
Mm,
improve myself, but
yeah.
also because I've done this work, I can see where other men struggle in particular. And I feel like what I'm hearing you say is that the biggest challenge is how do we introduce emotional fluency, like even just being able to name what we're feeling
Yeah. Right.
without doing so in a way that belittles or makes the person
Right.
feel wrong.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the needle you're trying to thread here.
And I know sometimes, and I know that I really enjoy gotcha moments. Like I
Mhm.
really enjoy I've I'm moved by it, like, oh my God, I cannot believe I missed that A to B to C logical sequence. How did I do that? I'm gonna change. But I also recognize that doesn't always work, right? And colleagues of mine that are versed in the work, and oftentimes women, LGBTQ professionals who have existed in anonymity and underfunded status. And I get access to these football teams, these basketball teams, these baseball teams that they've never got access to, and they are more qualified to be in there. But because
Mhm.
I present as a cisgendered heterosexual brown coach, I get the
Yep.
pass,
Yep.
right? But I recognize, like, okay, with my teams, what's that balance point of shame's the wrong word, but can I smack you to awake? Or do I have to meet you in this strength, meet you in your power, meet you in your potential to get you to move? Which I get it. You're right. Like sometimes that's the right play. So I've tried to become better at the surveying and the onboarding of programs and coaches that I work with to see where they're at. Cause maybe some teams have a better feel for, hey, stats will move this team, stats, statistics, and realities of the world will haunt them into change. But a majority of the time, I feel like I'm laying out the disclaimer of, I'm not here because you are bad. But statistics say a couple of y'all are. So what
Mhm.
I've tried to change it is, hey guys, you know what? We do an exercise. We put 10 kids in a circle, no matter the team, and we put one guy in the middle. The other 9 of you turn around and pretend you don't see him. And then I ask the other team, hey, what am I signifying with this weird circle where 9 guys turn their back on the middle guy? And they kind of ask, they joke a little bit, but I said, that's what we do in our team rooms, in our locker rooms, in our friend circles, in our lives. All of us know the dude who's saying problematic stuff. All of us know the
Mhm.
dude who we probably know is doing some wrong things. And we'd rather choose the harmony of the team room, the harmony of our friend circle, and ignore him. Or best case scenario, we uncomfortably laugh when he says something awful. We don't check him. We don't interrupt him. And I understand that some of y'all don't have the skills and you don't know what to say. You want to. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm helping coach with these things. So that's been a somewhat more effective way to do things. But you're right. It is such a thank you for welcoming me in your space. I'm this stranger that's going to come in
Yeah,
here and tell you what you may or may not be doing. So it is tough, but I also, change is tough. Right.
sure.
But that's also, Stu, honestly, that's the recipe why I think coaches are the key to this. Because no matter, I'm really comfortable giving a speech, right? I can talk, I can do these workshops. But the coach, like the second I leave, if my legs of them remembering the Samoan guy that came in and talked about gender violence for 6 hours or 12 hours later, that's a hell of a job by me. But they trust their coach. They signed up to play for their coach. They're around their coach every day. If I can give the coaches the tools to continue these convos in even more courageous spaces where the kids are willing to share truths. Because remember, every coach in America will tell you they have a family. Every coach in
Yep.
America will tell you they have a
Yes.
culture
Facts. Yes.
until that culture has to be tested by real shit. But
Yeah.
that's a whole, we'll get there. But that's the recipe because kids. I said this in a presentation at the Final Four. I said, coaches, you got this unique formula. It sounds like you're doing a lot of this reflection too in your adulthood, like me. Like I've had a therapist for 20 years. God bless him. He ever retires, I'm going to his house.
Yeah.
He tells me, Kip, you got to go find your people. You got to go find people you love and trust, and you got to be in situations that challenge you. That's hard to do in adulthood, right? Like most of the time, we
Yeah.
just get together, we watch the Ducks. Like that's what we do,
Yeah.
and then we
Go
go
Ducks.
home. But right, yes, go Ducks. I'm with you. But then when you're in a team, every single day you're excited to go see your buddies.
Mhm.
You're expecting coach is going to push me. You're
Mhm.
used to coach pushing you. You're already in a mindset of growth. Now, I know most of the guys are thinking about my out route or my ball screen defense or my curveball, but you're in a growth mindset. So when we
Mhm.
have them in that mindset, why can't we give 12 minutes every week to that, to real stuff? Why can't we give 15 minutes every 2 weeks to real stuff? Because I think that's our best chance to catch them. Because once they're adults in the world and the rat race it is we live, it's really hard to give them spaces to grow.
Yeah. Oh, so true. Here's a question. So when in the spaces you're working in with athletes, like you're in a lot of ways the person coming in and interrupting stuff that doesn't work, interrupting
Yeah.
behaviors that don't work,
Yeah.
installing new paradigms, and
Yeah.
on the fly creating buy-in. I think in hopefully most work environments, there's at least like an HR department that
Yeah.
if they're doing their job is preventing a lot of the ick from being
Right.
created. However, we also know it still exists. So
Yeah.
for the folks that are not playing for a team or don't have kids
Yeah.
playing for a team, how can this work begin to take hold in the groups that they find themselves a part of?
I think it's a great question. And because so much of what I'm trying to do with the teams is to give them the tools when they're in the space you just mentioned. When you're not on a team anymore, when you're at a barbecue, you're out with your boys, you're in a social setting with a group of family, how do you interrupt harmful, toxic nonsense?
Mhm.
What are these tools? What are these methodologies that allow you to feel comfortable enough that I'm going to deploy this by either saying it or taking an action, knowing full well the heat that's going to be associated with that? And I'm not saying physical violence all the time, but am I going to disrupt family dinner? Am I willing to disrupt this outing at the tailgate with my boys? Am I willing, like all these different things that come into
Yeah.
play? So I think that's some of the stuff that we try to do. And I would ask people that aren't in team spaces, what is the last thing you were willing to interrupt someone in your close circle? Right? It's almost easier sometimes to go at a stranger. It's almost easier sometimes to be out in public and some random that you have no connection to. I think that's easier because there's less consequence involved. What if it's your brother, right? What if it's your dad? What if it's your husband? What if it's your best friend from all these years and you really do value the relationship and you recognize that this is going to be a jolt to their system? I think that's when we need you. I
Mhm.
think in all the oppression we tried to fight, whether that's racist, all the isms, sexism,
Yeah.
racism, aside, all those things requires actual allies to not just take up with your words, not just take up space, but to take up risk, right?
Mhm.
To where some of what could come down the pike, I'll step in the way, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's hard. I'm not saying like, and it's also like this dichotomy because there's a great speaker. He works for It's On Us. His name's Kyle Richard. And I've met Kyle, and he's the D3 linebacker. I don't know if you heard this story. He took a bullet, like he literally physically interrupted a sexual assault at a party and got shot. And so Kyle gives a lot of talk, and obviously that's amazing courage. I try to tell my guys all the time, I don't want you to be Kyle because I want us to be 35 steps in front before you got to take a bullet, right? I want us to have these situations where there aren't guys that set up this party for that to happen. I want guys that didn't decide the only way I have courage enough to talk to a girl is via alcohol, right? All those different things we know lead to that. And as much as I credit him and I'm happy he's in the spaces that he's in and he's talking, I don't want people to think I'm training Batman, right? Like that's not what we're doing. I think there's different things we can do that start with ourselves and then go to our circles that
Mhm.
we're in.
Yeah. So I know that we've gone pretty deep into this topic very quickly. And, I want to just kind of take it back out just a little bit just to make sure that we're supporting everybody listening to this. And folks, like, this is definitely a more challenging topic on today's episode than, general mindset to help you crush your goals. But this is important too, because it's going to help us understand why people are the way they
Yeah.
are, especially the folks we love in our lives.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned the concept of the man box a couple of
Yeah.
times. I was wondering if you could explain that in a bit more detail. And then
Yeah.
also, what does like a healthier example of masculinity look like?
Yeah. I think the man box is an invisible scoreboard that only you can see. And it's
Okay.
above your bed every night. And it gives you false ideas of what you achieved today in terms of, well, remember when my buddy called me a name and I responded and I shoved him down the stairs. Well, that's +7. Nobody's going to bitch me, right? Remember when I said that thing about the girl and what she was wearing today in front of my buddies and they laughed. Well, that's a +12. Right. Remember all these, like you said, I got an A on the test. Plus I tackled 27 dudes today and I had 6 touchdowns. And I didn't thank anybody. I did my own celebration because it's all about me. I'm the alpha. So I consider the man box to be these that I go to bed at night and I see my score. But the crazy part about it is it goes to 0 tomorrow. And it's
Mhm.
harder to get points tomorrow. So I continue to escalate my decisions. I continue to escalate my behaviors even past what I'm comfortable with, but I'm terrified that my buddy's going to come in and see my man score. Because if he comes in and sees my score sucks, he's going to laugh at me. He's going to make fun of me. He's not going to want to be friends with me. And I say all this, Stu, because I know in hindsight, I know the horrors that I perpetrated on other men in my circles living fully in the man box. So like if you went back and asked
Same.
people in my high school, right, or my college basketball team, like, oh my God, Kip is the storyteller. Kip is the chronological of the team. Kip is like everybody's around me, but I crave that attention. You know what I did with it? I pointed out everybody else's flaws in the man box that I had. Because if I pointed it out
Yeah.
in them, they could never come back to me. Right. So if I
Yep.
pointed out like when I'm a senior in high school, but I haven't done XYZ with girls, I haven't had this type of relationship. Well, I'm going to point out that Jeff didn't either. I'm going to point it out first. Then everybody's going to laugh at Jeff and Kip's the funny guy. Nobody, the gaze never comes back to me. If I say I'm uncomfortable with this or I'm uncomfortable with that, I'll point it out that he is first. And that way I not only keep the attention, but I keep everybody below me and I never have to confront my own demons. And I think that's
Yeah.
in hindsight, that's like the weight of that performance. Um, in a lot of ways, I'm probably lucky that it didn't weigh me down more. And I know it's, and not because I was stronger. It just, I got lucky with life circumstances that it didn't cause me to do X, Y, Z things. And I think a lot of young men make choices rooted in that fake scoreboard that end
Yeah.
up harming everyone in their circle. And I think it's so often in learning and knowing about this stuff, people think, well, Kip, this gender violence stuff, your guys can walk girls home at night. Like they can look out for the boogeyman. It's not the boogeyman. Gender violence through acquaintances, like your friends and your loved and trusted ones, is where the problem is,
Mhm.
right? It's not the randomness. So we don't need the Justice League or the X-Men. We need each other to be better, because when I break and when I spill out all over everybody, it's the people in my proximity I spill out all over. And that's
Yeah.
usually my partner, my friends, my teammates, my family. And so that's a lot of that man box, and where I think it comes into play in so many avenues, right? Not just
Yeah.
sports. You know, your lust for money, your lust for your career change, your lust for your paycheck. Like who's, my black credit card versus your blue one. Here's my
Yep.
status. That's plus 7 points. My car versus your car, right? All those different things, it
Can
just
I
gets to
even add
be
one?
intolerable. Yeah.
I got to add one because this is me. Mine growing up was I knew that I was smarter than most other guys my age. So it was, how can I reinforce that I am smarter than you
Yes.
in every possible way
Yes. Great one.
imaginable? So
Great one.
so again, going back to the example I shared earlier, that B plus was like deeply wounding to my self-worth, because to your point in the example of the scoreboard, like that's like a fat goose egg, possibly even a negative score, quite
Yes.
honestly,
Yeah.
to not have straight A's. Like even as early as I remember fifth grade, I got a B plus. I got like an 89% in math, and I thought my world was ending.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
then you see me on the playground, outsmarting kids, like reciting stuff that they can't possibly remember. And
Yeah.
so as much as the stuff that you're describing is awful towards other people, it's also just self-damaging
Oh,
too. Like
oh, it is. Yes.
it all leads to
100%. And
it all
it's
leads to us
right.
hating who we see in the mirror.
Yes. Hurt people hurt people.
Mhm.
Right. And no, you're so right. What I worry about, and I tell coaches, and I recognize with your audience too, think about this in the spaces they're in. Like what happens when the field or the court or the diamond are no longer his escape? What happens? Because so
Yes.
many of the coaches, well, Kip, sports are his escape. Sports are his safe space. Well, there's going to come a point of time where it's not, where he can lock himself in the gym for 2 hours and do the workout he's always done to escape reality. And that time when it no longer, he can't get rid of it, is when we should all be terrified. We should all
Yeah.
be worried that we haven't given him the skill sets to navigate life without the ball, right? To
Mhm.
navigate life without that escape. And this is not obviously I'm still in sports. I'm coaching a high school program now, but I
Sure.
recognize that the skill sets I need to be onboarding, the kids will take care of the physical ones about the sport. They'll do that. The other stuff is where they need me, right? And they
Yeah.
need my coaches and the other coaches out there that they trust. But you're so right in that there's so many wounded, self-loathing souls out there, right? And it's an ongoing process. Like if you ask me, like Kip, versions of masculinity, I wouldn't dare to give a definition, because I think
Sure.
we have to break free first. Because that unlocks where you would take it, right? And I don't want to. My wife would laugh hysterically if she thought I was creating clones of me, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
still trying to escape. I'm still trying to learn. Like where I heard a quote, we're all masters in the making, so we have to stay students engaging. I would encourage anyone listening, like if your sense of self is rooted in curiosity, is rooted in unlearning to grow, is rooted in vulnerability, that allows you to be flexible, right? So often, and coaches do this, and I've done this, like, what we do is what we do. I have my system and we're true to the system. And if I change it, I'm flip-flopping. What if you're changing it based on new information? What if you're changing it based on better ideas? So I don't ever want to be tied to a set bullet point list. If I can be tied to
Sure.
those things I said, it allows me freedom of movement and forward,
Yeah.
right? And so that's probably the only thing I would encourage, and we try to leave with young men is, if you learn nothing else from your coach, but every day you want to look in the mirror and not just say, I remember what I did accurately, but also who did that harm? Who did that affect? How do I, like, you got to add some self-interrogation to our self-reflection to get to that actual awareness. I think that's a key part. And they're willing to do it in sports. Like, well, I went 10 for 17 from the free throw line. There's a reflection and an honesty. It's not good enough. We lost. I will now go do this to be better next time. Just got to take that same mindset to our life, to who we are
Yeah.
as men, to who we are as students, to who we are as friends. So I think that's why, maybe naively, but why I'm so passionate that sports are an untapped vehicle for this change.
Yeah. Oh man. This is such a rich conversation. I wish we could have like 3 hours to keep going.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
I do want to sneak in a couple other questions though while
Yeah,
we still have
love it.
some time. So clearly we're not going to fully define like the bullet points of this is what healthy masculinity is. I respect that.
Right.
I guess obviously don't name names, but what examples can you provide of either athletes you've worked with, teams you've worked with,
Mhm.
where you've been able to shift the paradigm and what's been possible when they start to model more healthy masculinity?
Great question. I think I started to feel rejuvenated or feel emboldened by the approach when I was on a college campus, and I'd be, either in the cafeteria or walking campus, and random professors would come up to me and say, "Hey, are you the basketball coach?" And I'd say, "Yeah, nice to meet you, professor." And they'd say, "I have such and such in my classroom." And typically on these topics, A, B, and C, I get zero participation. No one wants to wade in. Your guys are not afraid of tough conversations. And I was like, okay, at the very least, we're teaching young men to stand in their power and participate. I also worried that I was training a bunch of mansplainers, Stuart. So I had to balance that out and name that. That was one thing. I think the scoreboard's delayed. So when a young man that played for me 6 years ago texts me and says, "Hey, coach, you remember when you said stress isn't this road trip? It's when your wife's out of town and both babies are still in diapers." I just lived that. I remembered what you said, right? And so those type of things are impactful. Um, I think I hear leadership a lot, and I'm not disparaging the concept or the zeal to lead, but I think when my young people are galvanizers, right? I think that's maybe more important because I think leadership can be tyrannical, and I think coaches can abuse leadership, right? But if
Mhm.
you're a galvanizer around various causes, so I see young men that played for me galvanizing others towards something, even if it's not necessarily this social justice changing world thing, but they've galvanized a community around something. I feel like we did something that helped them because and then obviously, you try to see who they are when they're husbands and fathers, and you try to see. It's hard, but I'm lucky enough that I had fantastic young people that I think they worry about me now, like that I'm in a
Mhm.
different space. So they text me. I'm lucky enough to have those relationships, and they send me things that are happening in their lives. I would love to say that we had the stat or the analytic to show the rates on certain campuses decreased, right, based
Yeah, for
upon
sure.
our performances. We don't have it yet. Not enough campuses have been partners long enough. And obviously, correlation isn't always causation and vice versa. Um, but I do think you can be a beacon, maybe. I think one thing we try to do is, hey, what would I need to do to get you to wear this shirt? And it's some of our mantras, right?
Sure.
Even to another company that I would plug, the She Is Not Your Rehab company that's based by a Samoan from New Zealand. And what would it take for me to get you to wear to your campus a day, being who you are? Obviously, as a football player, basketball player, often you stand out physically, and your shirt said, "She is not your rehab." Because I just wore it to campus and I got to ask questions. So it's where's that? And we have a line of different, like I have a shirt that says "Feel to Fuel," and even the word "feel," that, Stuart. Like if we try to
Yeah.
get a D tackle to say he feels, his own coach might tell him to take it off. So what would it take? Are we getting movement in adopting those things? That's where I've tried to take it. As much as I'd like to say, you do
Sure.
this, all your guys, you can go to bed at night. You can go to bed at night because you tried. And that's the best, right? We tried to give them a decision-making paradigm they could use in life. Because I won't be there. Mom won't be there in Vegas when it's a 24-year-old bachelor party. There'll be no more team rules, team signs. It's going to be you.
Yeah.
And what do you do with that?
You know, everything you just shared, I love, and I'm right there with everything you're saying. And I'm here in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know where you stand on religion, but I think a really beautiful example of what you're describing is the Ohio State Buckeyes, the football team, you know, nationally ranked
Hmm.
every single year,
Right.
always competing for the national championship. Something like 15 of the players hosted a rally for Christianity on campus, like on a Saturday night, and
Yeah.
led a giant prayer circle and did baptisms
Yeah.
and gave all these testimonials. I know that that is diving into religion, which is not necessarily a topic I want to go down, but I think that's a beautiful example of standing for something big and
Hmm.
positive and doing it from a place of this is the influence I wield as a man.
Yeah.
I am a highly recognizable man,
Yep. Yep.
especially in this community. And
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, that's an example of what can be possible when it's not all about one upping and being the pure alpha male
Yes.
all the time.
For sure. No, yeah. And, like you mentioned, whether it's religion or any other thing that young people are passionate about, as a coach, coaches do, and I've lived this life, right, for 20 plus years. We all have our months and weeks of debriefing the year. What went right? Which one of our processes do we want to use? Like, we do this calendar creation and calendaring and onboarding, sequencing information to learn new things. And usually we save it for third down blitz packages. But if we are doing this same retrospective as a staff, and as you mentioned, Ohio State, what's their staff? 30 people, 35 people. We
Probably,
can't
yeah.
have two of them assigned to what space did we create, like you just mentioned, for our young people to utilize their platform to galvanize for the greater good, whatever that galvanization may be. And then you know what I learned, and I'm glad you brought up that example, because we always had a tiered process. Like, so by the time I was done at my previous head coaching job in college, it was a 4-year tiered program for teams of men. Like, you weren't going to play for me without going through 4 different years of this thing that culminated in a capstone project where I wanted them to go back into their communities where they're from and do something. And I called it community service forever. And then maybe 2023, the university had a brand new hire in the service learning department. And I was like, that's semantics. What does that mean? What's the
Yeah.
difference? And I actually sat down with this VP and he said, Kip, let me ask you about your latest community service. And our community service was at the Women and Children's Shelter in a
Mm.
neighboring town. And we went and we did yard work there and we got a tour. And he said, did you post that? I was like, yeah, we posted that. I was proud of my guys. He was like, okay, okay. A lot of those people there would like to remain, like, protect their anonymity from abusers that could be there, that could find them. And I was like, yeah, I didn't think of that. He goes, when did you ask the guys, like, leading into it? Did you talk about and frame how do people end up in these spaces? And I was like, nah, I just, they knew the name. And so we went. Okay, while you were on the tour, did you think about, you brought in 6'7", 6'8" dudes, and a lot of people are there, might be triggered or relive trauma because that size person is who put them here, that they're running from. And
Wow.
all
Yeah.
those things, it didn't even cross my mind. And
Yeah.
so what he taught me from my error, and right, vulnerability is a connection point. I had to admit, oh man, I messed this up. Was, okay, as a coach, if we get to that point again and my guys are passionate about a toy drive, or my guys are passionate about this, I love it. Let's make space for it, but let's do the pre-work, the why, the who. Let's do the post work of, guys, we're going to leave this space and people are going to give us a bunch of likes on Instagram. And the people that staff the soup kitchen are going to come right back to work tomorrow. Right. And they're
Mm.
gonna live this reality. So let's not just dip our toe in it and shower ourselves with praise. I mean, we're going to be proud of ourselves, but then how do we continue the support? Do you have a plan to continue support, whether that's a free throw challenge, whether that's you yourself going to go back once a month? Let's build that into service learning rather than community service. And I know I messed that up for decades, Stu. I know I did. I know
Mm.
we ran in there, waved our savior flag, got a photo op, and left. And I thought I was doing good. So I completely agree with you. I just hope all of us continue to onboard. Okay, now, rather
Yeah.
than this man points again for myself, how do I continue to support? Because sometimes I know, and who does this? I know I don't. I've come on your podcast and sucked up all the air. I don't walk into places and shrink, right? That's a
Right.
man thing. But sometimes in these places, I need to sit down, shut up, and observe. Sit down, shut up, and serve. And that's
Yeah.
really hard, especially for male athletes. Really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you've been told since you were 11 years old, you're going to be the next greatest thing, for sure.
And if you don't do that, then you didn't fulfill, like just like we talked about, then you failed, right?
Yes. Yes. This is actually a really great segue to the last question I want to ask you before we have to wind this down. So, I am a dad. I have a 10-year-old. He is a budding star on the soccer pitch. He can play really every single position. The only reason we're adamant he don't play goalie is because it gives my wife a heart attack every single time.
I can't, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but just to be vulnerable with you and then get to the question, biologically speaking, he's not mine. I am his bonus dad. His father is still in the picture. His father played Division 1 football,
Mm,
and
mm.
I'm not gonna give any more
Yeah,
identifiers there, but
right.
is very much the old school, like,
Mm,
suck it up, deal with it. And while I can't look you in the eye credibly and be like, I'm perfect and I
right.
support him emotionally every single time,
Yeah,
I am definitely the counterbalance to the messaging he gets
yeah,
over here. So,
yeah.
question is, for parents in like blended families, in like shared custody situations, whatever the case may be, where there are competing messages around
Mm-hmm.
masculinity, what is your
Yeah,
advice and coaching
great
there?
question. And obviously, thank you for sharing that. And I don't, and it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I think as a coach sometimes uses the framework that I do and try to help others do, I have a competing message of what their dad has told them or what their uncle has
Yep.
told them or their big brother has told them. Absolutely. So there's a version of this that I've walked a little bit. And what I try to say is, you don't need to become an exact replica of him or me. You need to be able to filter information to where it activates the best you. And so
Yeah.
what you're getting is an awesome input from both sides of a really hard issue that I trust you. I'm here for you to navigate for you, right? I believe this. Here's why. This is what I believe. Your dad believes this. I'm sure you should ask him, hey, Dad, who were some of your teachers of manhood? Who were some of the people that taught you these lessons you believe in? And now the great thing is we're both giving you input to a great decision that I trust you to make.
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's the best way that I've tried to frame it with some of my guys are like, Coach, like you really had me thinking about my pops because I don't think
Yeah.
he'd like this.
Yeah.
Right. Or, my grandpa or my football coach, it's like a hero to me. I think he'd hate this. Right. And it's like, and how do you go about not trying to tear down the other one to prop up your message, but to recognize like neither one of us should be in charge of your forward. We're
Mhm.
just input and information on your journey. We're mile markers and you get to choose the way, man. And right. And I'm always here to debrief and try to give you, if you have questions about things you've heard there or things you've heard from me, I'm here to talk about the why, about the what, about the source. But it's your journey. So that's probably the best I would say, having done that in a couple different sessions with young men. Um, because I think what I tried to reinforce to them, and one of my assistants, Chris Horton, who's a head coach now at Warren Wilson College in North Carolina, he had a great moment in one of those meetings where he said, my love for you is not conditioned to you being my clone. My love for you is not conditioned for you always doing what I say. My love for you is inherent. It will always be here. But you gotta don't make choices based on I might lose coach or I might lose my dad or I might, no, you gotta go be you. And so I think that's
Yeah.
the best we can do.
Yep. I just wanted to ask it because, I know that, and I think you actually eloquently reframe the question, like, men are going to get competing, young boys are going to get competing messages around masculinity all the time. And I think I'm hearing you say our job to just be their guide and love them and support
Yeah.
them and help them determine what it looks like for them.
And I think if I could add one thing, I don't want anybody listening to think I don't want your son to go be the best damn soccer player he can be. This framework or this philosophy doesn't ask them to put down chasing competitive greatness. It asks
Yep.
them to recognize that even the achievement of that is not going to solidify who they are as a person, right?
Correct.
Even signing billion-dollar contracts or winning all the championships, You don't have to go far to find examples of professional athletes telling you how hollow it was until they found whether it was religion or a new purpose or their family. I think people have twisted this because I didn't have a great record as a college coach. They say, well, Kip spent too much time with teams of men to win games. Well, actually, I endured, right? I could handle some of the things that happened. I wanted my young men to get the scoreboard too. Somebody out there is going to be smarter at ball screen defense than Kip. They're going to use what I am good at, which is this connection point type coaching, and they're going to go win, and then everyone's going to steal it, which is fine.
Yeah.
But that's how we know. So I don't want anybody to think that if your young person is passionate about their sport, that's awesome. But you have to make sure you, their coach, and their peers are framing the lessons. I think the sports are neutral. I don't think sports give a
Mhm.
damn about us. Like if somebody blows
Yeah.
out their knee for Ohio State, the next 5 star is going in. The only people that are going to meet that
Truth.
cart are mom and dad,
Truth.
right? So,
Yeah.
but I do think you learn lessons from the people you experience sports with. So your teammates will teach you stuff. Your opponents can teach you stuff. And it's incumbent upon your coach to tell you, this is the lesson. Let me show you it. Now we can go about learning it. Because otherwise, you just see the scoreboard and you go home.
So good. I can actually keep this conversation going for several more hours, but in the name of time, I want to make sure folks have the opportunity to connect with you, Kip. Where
Yeah.
can they learn more about you, Teams of Men? I know that you have a book that we didn't
Yeah.
even mention
That's all good. I
because
love
this
the combo too.
conversation's
Don't worry
been so
about it.
good.
Yes. I think the first place, I'm really active with, which is insane, Stu, because it's such a cesspool. But I'm on X/Twitter at Kip Ioane and at teams_men. And I'm really on there, honestly, not because I have this huge following, but I don't want to seed any of the platforms. I don't want to seed platforms to the negative stuff young men will see. If I can be, not just because I post gold, but I have built a following that people are so smart that post awesome things all the time that the least I can do is repost, reshare, retweet, and amplify. The book, thank you for mentioning it. Mirror Training, it's on Amazon. We were fortunate enough that when we launched it, got to bestseller status. Obviously, we'd like it, it's easy in the first week. It's almost like the Ducks got to #1. Can we stay there? Right.
Right.
So that's on Amazon, Mirror Training. And then our website, teamsofmenllc.com. And the reason I point people there is if you go to how we help, or you go to courses and bundles, it's the best use of your time. If you're a coach, if you have a coach, you want to point to it, because that will not only show spaces where Kip shows up to help, but also things that are just downloadable tomorrow. 60 discussion prompts coaches can use this week. Not obviously not 60, but this season with their players.
For sure. Yeah, and folks, as always, all of Kip's contact information, all of the websites, the links, and the book are all going to be made readily available in the show notes anywhere that you are catching this episode. So just be sure to click below and get connected yourself, continue the conversation, because real talk, guys, we barely scratched the surface on the topic of masculinity today, and it's a huge one. It's a huge one in our society. It's never going to go away, and the men in your life can use this type of help and support. So definitely get connected and support the men you love in doing this type of work. And Kip, as we wind this down, question I ask everybody: what are you acknowledging yourself for today?
Ooh, that's a great one. I'm gonna steal that with my team. Honestly, I would say this. I've heard a lot of people, when you get fired as you take a job as a college coach, knowing it's probably going to end in flames. Like that's just the nature of the business. But
Yeah.
even when it happens, it's still a soul wound, right? Especially for me when in a place that I've been for 25 years. But I want to acknowledge myself for, I don't think like I'm not necessarily the most optimistic person, like, oh, it happened for a reason. And look at me, I'm better. I'm proud that I met the moment and had to become who I had to become to meet that moment. And I think that in that there's resilience there. There's at least showing my kids, right, who saw me in the lowest of lows, coming home to tell them that I wasn't a coach at the college in the town anymore. And showing them how I responded to that. It doesn't mean like, oh, look at me, I have a championship now, or I got millions of dollars, but I'm still here, I'm still dad. So I give myself, I credit myself for showing up when I needed to and meeting the moment when I needed to.
Yeah. And I acknowledge you, Kip, for being a light, being a force of change, and being the person that's willing to get into the arena, to reference Theodore Roosevelt's famous speech, like to get into the arena, to have your face muddied and bloody, for doing the work of making a positive impact in the lives of men. And I know that you're going to continue to have an impact, and being the head coach maybe was just a chapter. It wasn't the final destination, but you are here for a reason, and you've made an impact on me today. So I know that you're going to continue to have an impact out there in the world. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
being
sir.
here tonight.
I appreciate you. Great. I continued success to you and the podcast and the fam.
Thank you so much. And folks, this has been another episode of Your Inside Track to Success. I know you got value from today's episode, so please share this out with at least one other person. The cost of admission is always free. And hit like, hit subscribe yourself, hit that bell icon so you can get all of the updates as we continue to put them out. But we will catch you next week with another amazing guest or message. We'll see you then.